start. Anna, please share your screen and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay. So I hope you can see my screen. And yes, good morning, good day, good afternoon, wherever you are. I'm happy to contribute to this important discussion and this session on organized crime and wildlife. So my presentation today will be more on the practical enforcement measures against wildlife crime and the often invisible aspect of seizure management. So seizures have become a popular approach to disrupt the illegal wildlife trade. These seizures may consist of dead animals, their parts, and derivatives in the form of trophies, food, cosmetics, fashion, ornamental, medicinal products, but they may also involve live animals. While I have focused only on seized animal wildlife, the illegal wildlife trade of flora is just as important and represents another important wildlife market. But first, let me explain a bit the process of when enforcement authorities take hold of wildlife. Seizures specifically designate a temporary custody placed on the wildlife by authorities. This constitutes a provisional period during which, for example, further investigations are undertaken or the identity of wildlife is verified. During this period, the owner retains their legal ownership over the wildlife, although authorities may have temporarily deprived them of the actual wildlife itself. Confiscations, on the other hand, designate the point at which the wildlife is placed in the permanent custody of the authorities, usually after the court has ruled that the legal ownership of the wildlife should be ceded to the state. It is therefore only after confiscation that authorities can decide upon the long-term management. So as you can imagine, and generally it is a lengthy process, in particular when it comes to live animals, starting from the interception, control of the animal, to the immediate care, transfer and transportation, to short-term and long-term arrangements, and the provision of veterinary screening. Suffice to say, it's also very complicated, and it harbors many potential pitfalls where wildlife may be exposed to vulnerabilities and harm. Unfortunately, wildlife seizure management remains overlooked in enforcement, and there seems to be also a continuing lack of debate from a criminological perspective. Wildlife continues to be treated in many instances on the basis of the sustainable use of wild flora and fauna, which allows for their continued commodification and exploitation. By focusing on all but their economic value, wildlife suffering receives little or no significance. And as argued by green criminologists, the prism that I chose, this follows in part a speciesist dismissal of wildlife as non-human that renders them disposable, sellable, and even killable. Seizures and confiscations, as part of the enforcement response to wildlife crime, are important practices to review, therefore, as the question of harm may also be of concern in relation to seized and confiscated animals. There's a potential risk, for instance, that seized animals become re-victimized through inadequate care, mismanagement, or improper handling. What characterizes the complexity of seizure management, moreover, is the inherent competition between conservation and animal welfare agendas. Whereas conservationists focus broadly on the restoration and health of the biotic community as a whole, animal welfarists focus on defending the rights of individual animals. This can also have its bearing on the management of confiscated animals. Sorry. There may be disagreements as to what interests they have and what management ideally should look like. So, the context in which such efforts are carried out is therefore very important. While on the international level there is CITES, the Convention on Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, which provides a number of recommendations on how countries can handle wildlife seizures, seizure management remains a national responsibility. For my study, I have taken the concrete examples of Czech Republic, Germany, as well as Kenya and Uganda to deliberate on the present state and challenges of seizure management. I chose this cross-regional focus because I wanted to consolidate insights along traffic routes. And I combined here for multiple methods, including documentary analysis, seizure data analysis, and above all, semi-structured interviews with key informants. But let me just jump straight into some of the results. So, to start with Kenya and Uganda, illegal trade in charismatic fauna is perhaps the most prominent. While poaching has dropped somewhat, borders remain porous, and both countries remain, even today, a leading source of ivory and rhino horn, as well as other trophies, as large volumes leaking from stockpiles and transiting from other countries continue to be illegally exported. Trophies and bushmeat are prevalently seized. Live animal seizures are perceived as rare. A prevailing challenge are available storage capacities, especially for the temporary storage of wildlife. As interviews underlined, dedicated storages are full, and also the police station storages are full. It can thus happen that the wildlife is kept in the court under the prosecutor. Dead wildlife, in particular trophies, constitute the main focus of management efforts in Kenya and Uganda. Some wildlife derivatives that perish easily, such as bushmeat, for example, perish easily and are therefore destroyed immediately due to the lack of proper storage facilities. When it comes to trophies, Kenya has pioneered the burning of ivory as the first country in the world. Yet also here, not all wildlife is being actually destroyed, and as has been remarked, permanent storage facilities are also full. In Uganda, trophies are stockpiled as their sale is prohibited and the government opposes destruction and burning. Stockpile management has been universally noted by interviewees as challenging because, as you can imagine, it costs a lot of money and resources, and there's also this permanent security and corruption risk. Corruption is perceived as pervasive, and stockpile thefts have been recorded in both countries. The reuse of wildlife for training and education purposes is less common, and for highly valued trophies such as ivory and rhino horn, it is not done as the security risks are considered too high. When it comes to live animal seizures, training is often missing among enforcement authority officials, and there is a risk that wildlife goes through further harm because they are not being handled or fed appropriately. Very few enforcement authorities in both countries are estimated to possess the necessary expertise and equipment to take care of wildlife adequately in order to avoid risks of injury and stress. After confiscation, management options for live animals include release to the wild and captive management. So to go over to Czech Republic and Germany, they are, as you can imagine, to some extent regionally harmonized through the European Union frameworks and directives issued on this topic. Enforcement, nevertheless, also varies. In the Czech Republic, you have the Ministry of Environment, which oversees the management of confiscated wildlife, while the Environmental Inspectorate conducts enforcement on the ground. In Germany, federal state authorities share responsibility with a central national authority when it comes to wildlife seizures. The responsible structures may vary from federal state to federal state, and in total, it therefore comes that you have 238 enforcement authorities which are handling wildlife seizures in the country. When it comes to live animal seizures, Czech Republic has designated rescue centers for the short-term management of specific CITES taxons, for example, just for birds. One major challenge is that rescue centers are not obliged to receive seized animals, and it therefore happens fairly often that they refuse to take over an animal. Zoos are also often contacted for help, but also here, institutional unwillingness continues to be a barrier to a placement. In Germany, there are no specific placement institutions. Live animals are placed preferably in zoos, but also here, finding a permanent home can be difficult, as zoos and rescue centers are full. Even though the new action plan of the EU on wildlife crime mentions that the release into nature of confiscated native wildlife is to be prioritized, only the Czech Republic has mentioned to conduct any efforts in this regard. Dead specimens are generally stored or redistributed between facilities for research, education, or training purposes. Both countries seem to place a value on repurposing. As many informants have pointed out in this regard, even if the specimen cannot be brought back to life, there is a reparative value in using them to train law enforcement and raise awareness on the harms of wildlife crime. At the same time, from the responses and constant references to evaluation made, it is clear that the commodification process has not halted with the seizure of wildlife. In the Czech Republic, destruction may also be considered. If the wildlife cannot be redistributed due to their poor condition, biosecurity risks, or if no one expresses an interest in the confiscated specimens, the wildlife is often burned. So, let me come to some reflections. There seems to be, on the whole, many parallels also between the two regions. While frameworks to guide seizure management are in place in all countries, they vary in detail and often do not cover the entire seizure management process. Even though Europe is often hailed as having more developed structures and regulations in place, guidelines for how to manage specimens only once confiscated are patchy. In contrast, the Uganda Wildlife Act provides a rather detailed framework and contingency planning for the different stages of seizure and confiscation management. But as evident from all the data, there is no need to develop further frameworks and streamline measures when the basic infrastructure is missing, as the best meaning frameworks are of no use when they cannot be operationalized. I have also put a quote there from one of the key informants. The lack of adequate infrastructure and shortcoming of available resources have been raised by all countries respectively. Indeed, seizure management not being prioritized, management of confiscated wildlife often falls back to pragmatism and choosing the most appropriate solution under constraints. At the same time, case-specific and situated measures are also necessary, as one-size-fits-all solutions can have their drawbacks. Some degree of decoupling with regard to implementing given frameworks could be noted. Indeed, practitioners, for example, in Czech Republic and Germany, have noted that in some cases it is even preferable not to follow procedures to a point. Some requirements that are imposed by the legal frameworks cannot be met with available resources or infrastructure. In the Czech Republic, this was most noticeable with regard to quarantine requirements and the lack of adequate facilities to ensure that animals can be placed there safely. To overcome this situation and prevent any health risk, it has become common practice to call veterinarians ahead to the rescue center that has no such quarantine facilities. But flexibility to accommodate uncommon cases was also highlighted. Another example included the seizure of a white tiger in the Czech Republic in 2022 and 23, which gave way to new collaborations between state authorities and animal welfare organizations, including Four Paws, to assist in finding a new home for confiscated, well, the two tigers, which was ultimately in Germany. So these are just some reflections on the results I found on seizure management, but as you can see, there are many inconsistencies involved in seizure and confiscation management. Although I have now scratched just the surface, it is a field which remains to be transparent and is marked by compromises made between many values and priorities. Okay, so thank you for listening, and I'm happy to join in discussions later.
Thank you very much, Anna, for this interesting presentation. We are switching now to Johanna. And please keep your questions, or just put your questions in Q&A, please. I would like to encourage the attendees to do it. Joanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm just sharing my screen. Hopefully now you can see my presentation.
Yes.
And thank you so much for the feedback. So good morning or good afternoon, and so great to be here today. And it's a great honor to participate in this panel. I think this topic that we choose today is very important when we are talking about all the conservation efforts that are now trying to achieve worldwide. As it was mentioned, I'm Marsa Johanna Sibik from Hungary, from the University of Szeged, and as you can see, I'm teaching at the Faculty of Law and Political Sciences, Department of International and European Law, and wildlife crime has been in the center focus of my research for around 10 years now, and I also defended my PhD in this topic. So today I choose and just an issue from this really huge era that I would like to share, that is the transnational crime element in wildlife crime. And I also would like to highlight the importance of all these international instruments that were accepted in this area. And as I also want to focus on the Eastern European countries, because as Anna also mentioned, European Union is kind of seen as a high level of, biodiversity protection, and all the conservation efforts that we can see here are very well known. But also we have to face some challenges. So I think it's particularly important to highlight these challenges as well. So without further ado, this is kind of the main content that I would like to share today. And as I highlighted, I also would like to establish a definition of wildlife crime, because I think it's really important to see that we don't have kind of a unified version of wildlife crime as a definition. So when I started my research in this area, for me, it was kind of a challenge, at least to see what I'm talking about. So it was really kind of challenging to define wildlife crime at all from an international law perspective. So I would like to share my definition and also a bit about the main instruments. So let's see. First, I would like to highlight the definition and the importance of the definition. As I mentioned, as we can see today, we have to face with biodiversity loss, and one of the main triggers of biodiversity loss worldwide is wildlife crime and the overexploitation of the species. And as it was reflected several times by several documents, I choose one. This is the Living Planet report of the World Wildlife Fund that was published recently. It highlights that worldwide we have to see a huge decline in not just the natural environment, but also in biodiversity and the population of different species. So as you can see, it's really long. I don't want to read it all. This is a definition that I established for wildlife crime in my PhD. And I think the main elements are highlighted. So as you can see, I considered wildlife crime that is based on the application of the criminal law under national legislation. And in the previous presentation, we also heard that national enforcement is so much when it comes to, it has a great importance when it comes to wildlife crime and the fight against wildlife crime. So besides we have these all the beautiful international instruments, we don't have to forget that the national implementation of such instruments and also the applicability of these instruments, and at the end of the day, the enforcement are particularly important to save these species. And I also consider transnational organized crime as an element of wildlife crime, and also the propensity of the corruption, because as we will highlight later on, all these international instruments connecting to this area are considering these elements as well. So if we can see also reflecting to the decline of a species and the natural environment, I just wanted to show my example for today, Europe. And as you can see, we are kind of, in a great place in a way that we have to face with maybe lesser biodiversity loss. Is still a struggling number, but as you can see, it's we are quite in a bad situation, but in other places of the world even have to face with more serious issues. And what is interesting in Europe, that we have the highest ecological, footprint of consumption, because it's a well-developed area. Western European countries, Eastern European countries, South European countries as well, so the whole Europe, but still we have to face with overexploitation, so the non-sustainable use of the natural resources in Europe. On the other hand, as it was also mentioned in the previous presentation, Europe has introduced, especially the European Union, very great programs connecting to the legal protection of the endangered species. Also, we have the implementation of the CITES Convention in the form of EU law, law that find its way to the member states legislation as well. So we see increased conservation actions in Europe, but still we have struggles to deal with that I will highlight later, especially when it comes to some species of freshwater fish, reptiles, and amphibians. We see a huge decline in these populations. And let's move to transnational organized crime. And in this map, I wanted to highlight, it's not my map, it's something that I use for presentations. So as you can see, European Union and Europe in general is a particularly interesting place when it comes to wildlife trafficking routes, because we are not just a destination country, but also we are in a transit place and also a place of origin, because we also have European species that are a subject of intensive wildlife trafficking and also wildlife crime. So European Union member states and also European countries that are not EU members are in a particularly difficult situation, because enforcement bodies and agencies have to face with this like huge problem that we are not just kind of, a destination country, but also a transit place in between different continents. So these kind of problems with wildlife trafficking routes puts European Union and also European Union in a difficult place. And I wanted to show the most important legal instruments that I think must be considered in the fight of wildlife crime. Of course, we have the already mentioned CITES Convention on the International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. It's kind of an older treaty when it comes to international law and all the fight against wildlife crime, but I think it's a particularly interesting question whether we can consider CITES at all as an instrument in the fight of wildlife crime. As it's shown in literature, of course, it's a very important instrument, but we also have to remember that CITES was originally accepted in order to develop rules in order, to trade species in a sustainable way. So it wasn't primarily established a framework for wildlife conservation. Also, we have the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. That is the most important element in my presentation today, because I would like to focus on the role of organized crime. It's a particularly quite new convention with almost universal ratification, but also we have to face with enforcement problems when it comes to this international treaty. And also I listed the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, because this international treaty is also considered as well in literature a very important element in the fight against wildlife crime, because usually there is kind of an element of corruption in many countries that are facing wildlife crime. And also I already mentioned national legislation and the importance of criminal codes of national states, of nation states or states at all, because as we can see, enforcement at the end of the day and the proper implementation, all these beautiful instruments that were accepted on the international or EU level has to be implemented, has to be somehow enforced in the member states or on the national sphere. So it's very important to see that without the proper enforcement of these international instruments and all the law that were accepted, we cannot say that this is really a functioning system. And I also highlighted EU wildlife trade regulations, because the European Union also joined CITES and also already back in the 1980s established its own regulation connecting to wildlife trade. And now we have a very nice, like different levels of legislation. So we have international law, we have EU law, and also the member states legislation connecting to wildlife trade and wildlife conservation enforcement when it comes to EU countries. And as we can see, transnational organized crime and wildlife crime strongly connecting together, because all these like organized criminal groups realize the potential value of exploiting natural resources. They can use the traditional routes when it comes to the transnational element of wildlife crime and wildlife trade. So we can see that wildlife crime is closely linked to other criminal activities and also other forms of organized crime, such as, for example, money laundering or other violent crimes. And this connection was highlighted in several documents that were accepted by the different bodies of the United Nations, also resolutions of the General Assembly and other UN bodies. And why is it a very great issue? Because illegal trade in wildlife is a huge business and estimated to worth up to 20 billion US dollars per year in turnover. So as you can see, it's a huge number that we can see here that can be exploited by all these criminal groups. And so it poses a huge challenge for the national authorities because of the continuity of the act, because of the practice of corruption and the propensity of to violence that I already mentioned are kind of establishing element and very common when it comes to wildlife crime. When it comes to European Union, I would like to also highlight that EU citizens don't have much knowledge about wildlife crime and also the importance of wildlife conservation in general. I think it's partly because they don't have like proper information connecting to the relevant legislation. I wanted to put it in a way that there is a lack of social conscientiousness when it comes to the wildlife trade in general. So they are traveling to, exotic countries and other continents, and they tend to buy all these products, wildlife products, and bring back to Europe. And they don't know that actually they are committing, criminal act or committing a crime. And of course, it's not the biggest issue when it comes to wildlife trade because it's not organized in form, but still it's a huge problem that they don't have like a proper knowledge about it. So I think on a social level, we also have to see these problems. And also because of these issues connecting environmental crime and also green crimes and wildlife crime, there is a new definition in literature, transnational environmental crime. As you can see from the definition, it also causes the cross-border trading of species and other resources. And connecting the GI-TOC, United Nations Convention Against Organized Crime and Wildlife, we can see that it's, as I mentioned, it's quite a newer international instrument when it comes to the fight against transnational organized crime, and it aims to prevent, detect, investigate, and prosecute the so-called serious crimes. So it's very great that in this international treaty we can find proper basic definitions what is considered as a serious crime. But it is a question when we are talking about the state parties legislation, whether environmental crime or wildlife crime, to be more specific, is considered as a serious crime or not. Because if we don't consider it a serious crime, the OC cannot or GI-TOC cannot be applied in this sense. So I think it's very important that each and every country has to consider wildlife crime and environmental crime as a serious threat and as a serious crime, because all these measures can be applied only in this way. And also, if we are talking about GI-TOC and this convention, some problems arrived to the scene from the acceptance of the international treaty, because it was quite late when the international community and the state parties were able to adopt the review mechanism connecting to GI-TOC. So because of lack of data, because of the lack of answers to the questionnaires, because the countries didn't want to share operational information connecting to organized crime, we don't really have any reliable sources connecting to the proper enforcement of this international treaty. So we actually cannot see that can be a source that is a well-functioning source against wildlife crime. So as some conclusions, I added thoughts on the risks and challenges that are because of the transnational organized crime elements in wildlife crime. So we can see that organized criminal groups use the proceeds of wildlife crime in order to finance additional activities. So I think it's a great risk to the national security as well. And they have established networks easily that allow smuggling and the transcontinental transport of wildlife species. As I already mentioned, they can use the traditional trading routes in order to trade with these species and also with the products, so they can use these original ways in this activity. And unfortunately, in some countries, they have better weapons or even resources than the state armed forces, those people who really, poach the species or they conduct these activities. So proper enforcement sometimes hindered by the lack of resources. And also what we can see is the mixed transport of certain illegal products. So for example, they trade weapons, drugs, and wildlife species all together. And because I'm really at the end of my time for the presentation, I just wanted to highlight some examples from Europe, because the other things can be mentioned as part of the discussion. So I wanted to highlight the example of European countries, and we can see that wildlife crime is quite serious here as well, especially when it comes to the trade in songbirds and the birds of prey. We see that there are trading routes, and also we can see trade from Eastern European countries to South European countries, and it's a huge threat to the conservation efforts when it comes to birds, songbirds, and other species of birds. So at the end of the day, this is the end of my presentation. Later on, we can still discuss some things that I put to my presentation, such as an additional protocol to the GI-TOC concerning wildlife crime. But because I ran out of time and I practically finished my presentation, I finish up here, and I'm open to questions and discussions as well. Thank you for the attention, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much for your interesting presentation. Let us immediately switch to Shaba for the last presentation, please.
Okay. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Csaba Zsigmond, assistant professor in Hungary, University of Public Service. I have been working at this university for 5 years. Before, I had been working for the Hungarian police as an investigator. I dealt with organized crime, investigation against organized crime, investigation of financial crime, etc. At this university, we train the future police officer. My topic is organized crime in wildlife crime in Hungary. My PhD topic was too, and I conduct research in Hungary and collect data, and I write PhD and more article in this topic. First of all, we have to determine what is organized crime. Organized crime isn't the same organized criminal group. Organized crime is a criminological determination. Organized criminal group is law determination, not same. Organized crime wider than the organized criminal group. Organized criminal group, according to my starting point was in my research Convention of Palermo. Organized criminal, according to the Convention of Palermo, organized criminal group shall mean a structured group of 3 or more persons existing for a period of time, about 1 year, 5 years, acting in concert with the aim of committing 1 or more serious crimes or offenses established in accordance with this convention, in order to obtain direct and indirect financial or other material benefit. I have to emphasize organized criminal group aren't always mafia type group, because a lot of organized criminal group rather is loosely chain, loosely network, and I have to mention the companies which often ensure the framework to the committing to the organized crime. We can see the other determination, Hungarian which contain Hungarian Penal Code. According to Hungarian Penal Code, a conspiratorial group, at least 3 persons, organized in a hierarchical structure, operating for extended period of time with the aim committing international offenses punishable by a term. Intentional offense is punishable by a term of imprisonment of 5 years or more. We can see the Hungarian Penal Code contain a narrower determination. This is a problem because the Hungarian authorities don't use this determination. A lot of organized type group. Yes. What is wildlife crime? Johanna and Anna mentioned wildlife crime is cover poaching, smuggling of wildlife product, trading, trafficking, and threat the biodiversity and human health, etc. And this is a dangerous crime. And more and more organized criminal groups take part in this activity around the world. The UNODC, Europol, and Interpol mention in their reports this problem. Another problem, the punishment and detection is low around the world, and this is other issue. About my research interval was 2014 to 2021. There were 3 pillars: criminal file research, examining of seizures, and semi-structured interviews with experts. I filtered 570 criminal cases in wildlife crime. I selected those files which were committed at international level, international smuggling cases, and I found 109 criminal files which were relevant for my research. And examined the seizures at the airport of in Liszt Ferenc International Airport in Budapest. I found 70 cases which were relevant. And I conducted semi-structured interviews with expert police officers at the Hungarian National Bureau of Investigation. This authority have a special unit which deal with the environmental investigation of environmental crime, and I conducted semi-structured interviews head of Hungarian CITES, head of Biodiversity Conservation Department, Ministry of Agriculture, and custom officers at the airport, and with the Milbus Board Conservation Foundation in Romania. I found, this is my results. We can see the main goods which were smuggled to Hungary from foreign country were the corals at the airport. A lot of tourists took corals without knowing these corals are protected. And these cases doesn't refer to organized crime. This is the perpetrator were tourists. This is not typical organized crime. But the medicinal product which contain protected plant and protected animal derivatives and skin goods and crocodile skin goods refer to organized because at these cases we can see organizing. We can see, yes. Yes, the tendencies. These cases refer to corporate crime. The medicinal products and snake skin goods and crocodile skin goods are produced by legally registered companies in foreign country, and they produce these goods without any certification, CITES certification and other. And a lot of Hungarian consumers order on online area these goods, and the corporate ensure the framework to commit the crime, and we can qualify this type of crime as an organized criminal group according to Convention of Palermo, but we can't qualify as organized criminal groups according to Hungarian penal code. And the other tendency in Hungary, smuggling of songbirds from Romania to Italy. Source country Romania, transit country Hungary, Croatia, and Slovenia, and few Italian restaurants in North Italy mainly prepare delicious food from songbirds, and this is a supply chain. This supply chain, and we can see a division of labor is observed. There are poachers who catch the songbirds in live, smugglers who smuggled this songbird through the border, and traffickers who sell these songbirds to the restaurant. And this is this group can qualify as a criminal, organized criminal group. And I found an interesting case. The Hungarian custom officer arrest Romanian people who tried to smuggle songbirds in a van. And unfortunately, first the Hungarian police officers don't send message to other countries, and the changing of information wasn't. But I talk with boss of police station, and they send a message to Italy, because the Romanian people had paper, and it was an address, Italian address in this paper, and they sent this information to Italian police, and the Italian police, Carabinieri, arrested Italian male, and it was house search, and they found more 100 songbirds in cages. Yes. Another problem, these songbirds isn't protected in Romania, but their capture by netting or other means requires a permit. Okay. Conclusions. The international trafficking across the borders and continents is a big problem. The international information exchange between authorities is often lagging behind, and we can see the organization. We can qualify this group activity as organized criminal group according to Palermo Convention. And my proposals, we can consider, we can amend, we should amend my Hungarian Penal Code organized criminals group determination. The hierarchical structure and conspiratorial group should be abandoned, And we may increase the penalties for wildlife crime according to European Union and according to General Assembly resolution. Okay, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Csaba, for your very interesting presentation. And I would like to start a discussion. There are several questions and Q&A, but of course, panelists have the privilege. If you have any comments about each other's presentation, please include them also in the chat, or just raise your hand and express it. The first question which I see in Q&A, and I see Anna is trying already to answer it, but you can now, we can put it to the audience. Dan van Whom is asking, is there information based on your research about seizures in Europe that end up in the illegal trade? Do you want to try to answer it, please?
Yes, I was about to, but so for the Czech Republic, but probably you have come across it as well. It is not any more recent, but there have been thefts of rhino horn from museums and other exhibitions. So these were not necessarily seized rhino horn, but and they date some years ago. For Germany, actually there have been recent attempts of stealing ivory from storages, but they were, as I was told, unsuccessful. So yes, so this is what I've come across. But I have to say also for the storages in Czech Republic and Germany, very similarly, many are not well administered or equipped. So there's not necessarily always also a great overview of what they have and in what shape it is.
Okay, if the other panelists wanted to join the discussion, please. The other question is coming from Janine, who is asking again to Anna, what are your thoughts on alternative to seizures or ways to negate the harm on live wildlife caused by seizures? Can you
Yes.
refer to this?
Of course, well, let's say the go-to answer is always like have more training and awareness raising among law enforcement in any country. I mean, this was raised also for Germany and Czech Republic, but I've highlighted it especially in East Africa, and have to have training specifically for first responders and have a clear also guidance on whom to contact later on, because often there's no awareness. Okay, we have now seized this animal. What do we do with it? Then they try to call a rescue center or any other shelter, which may not even have, the knowledge to deal with such a specific exotic species. So the more time you take, the more probability there is that the animal is suffering and is harmed. So it's best to, yes, have this set up already of what to do when and how. And when you have the opportunity, as for example in Germany and the Czech Republic, you have a lot of animal welfare organizations who are already trained in this, who have the contacts, and they often also directly try to help law enforcement in these matters. But again, it's a question of, do they actually know that they are there to help or not?
And the last question to you comes from Bettina. How are NGOs involved in conservation issues address the issue of seizure management, and do they recognize the issue of re-victimization? Very interesting question, please.
Yes, so NGOs more more minded around conservation. Yes, they do definitely also recognize the issue of re-victimization. But then again, so as I said, depending on like the release into the wilds, they still would kind of prioritize that that the biotic community, that the species already present in that ecosystem are preserved. And in many cases, that means actually deciding against this individual seized animal or seized animals, because you never know of the of the risks of spreading pathogens, or if the animal itself is capable of surviving. So although they do, as I said, acknowledge it, yes, they still would prefer than to use captive management, and even if it means that, well, yes, that the individual animal is further harmed and re-victimized.
I want to take advantage of being moderator and also ask you, because we had about the research methods, especially from Csaba. Can you elaborate a bit about your own research methods in your study?
Yes, of course. So in my case, I especially wanted to be led by the practical knowledge already in this field. So I had two separate rounds of interviews. So I first had, well, first took stock of the kind of international governance of seizure management and of best practices out there with practitioners from different countries, not only the ones I presented now because they were my case studies, but from also different regions of the world, Southeast Asia, Latin America, West Africa. And then later with these insights of what factors are actually, right now considered as missing or important to acknowledge in seizure management, I went into the case studies and again, collecting a lot of key informant interviews with the different practitioners involved in different stages or in the regional collaboration on this matter. And next to this, I did, legislative and policy document analysis and seizure data analysis to just make kind of this pattern more visible.
Okay, thank you very much. There are also some questions to Joanna. Tamara is asking, was Australia included in the research, the map of wildlife movement? Can you please answer it?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you for the questions, actually, because I received several ones, as I can see from the session. Well, particularly Australia, it's interesting because I has been focusing on European countries because I'm, a citizen of an EU member state, and as an international lawyer, I was interested in the EU tendencies. But it's interesting because in this last 10 years, since I have started to work in this field, I really haven't encountered with literature from Australia, but I know that it's a particularly important matter in Australia as well, wildlife trade, wildlife crime, and also illegal trade. But for me, it was quite interesting because it was out of the scope of my research and also out of the scope of the literature I has been really seen in the last 10 years. So no, my short answer is no, because it was out of the scope of my research and out of the scope of the literature I used to my work.
Okay, thank you very much. The question from Dan. What are the advantages and disadvantages of promoting the adoption of a protocol covering wildlife trafficking under the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime? Please.
Wow, thank you, Dan, for this really good question. As an international lawyer, I just really love, establishing these different categories and why is it good or why is it bad to sign a new international treaty. I collected a couple of thoughts on this topic because we can elaborate on this question for a long time, actually. Well, accepting a new international treaty, I think it's always kind of a question whether we really need a new international treaty, because it's called a protocol, but it's an international treaty that has to be negotiated, has to be signed and also ratified by the member states and also the states who would like to be party to this convention. So I think it's kind of a question whether we need a new international treaty. Of course, because of the lack of the unified definition of wildlife crime, it would be great to have at least one document, telling us that yes, this is wildlife crime when you can see a transnational organized crime element. So from this perspective, it would be great to have a new international treaty. But rather than to talk about wildlife crime, we should act, against wildlife crime. So I think it would be better to enforce the already existing international treaties. But because there is a discussion about this protocol connecting to GI-TOC. I think it's great because it's kind of boosted a discussion about the fight against wildlife crime. So it would be great to at least to see what we can call a protocol, because I saw a draft, but it was kind of just some basic routes what we would like to include to this protocol. So we will see. I think it's always appreciated if a new international instrument is accepted, but rather than to talk about it, we should really act against wildlife crime. So without accepting a new international treaty, it would be great if we just enforce the already existing ones.
Thank you. And I see that Bettina is also concerned, and I also have my concerns about your talk on the recognition of wildlife crime as a serious act. Otherwise, the combating it will be a bit different, of course, if it's not considered as it. But the question is there not a danger of losing the visibility of wildlife crime when it is included in the broader term of transnational environmental crime?
Sorry, I think it's a different view that I have because I'm an international lawyer, so I always see like the broader perspective. And also when I see definitions, I would like to just really establish like clear categories. And if I see the transnational crime element in wildlife crime, of course, that in the scope of my former thesis, I established a definition that included this aspect as well. On the other hand, I think it really depends how you define wildlife crime, because I think it has to be considered a serious act, and based on the definition of the GI-TOC, it has to be, punished as a serious act. But on the other hand, we still have like wildlife crime in a form that remains in the hand of the national legislation and the national enforcement. So we still have like crimes against nature. We have, for example, in Hungary, different legislation connecting to poaching and other crimes against nature or crimes against the environment. And some aspect, these crimes also can be seen as wildlife crime, but I was always focusing on the big picture because I'm an international lawyer, so I see like the big picture and trying to connect those definitions. So I don't think so that we will lose like the visibility of the crimes when we don't consider it as, or if we consider it a serious crime. So I see this definition through the implementation of the GI-TOC, rather than just to talk about, the different definitions of when it comes to connecting of the definitions of wildlife crime.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're talking about definitions, it's very much depending from which discipline you are looking at it and from which perspective.
Yeah, sure.
And I see as a continuation of our discussion now, the question to Csaba, when there is the concern about how the proposal of changing the definition, especially by law enforcement and especially by customs, what will it bring? How will it, or do you support this change of definition? Is definition really a problematic issue? Please.
Yes, I mentioned the Hungarian definition contain expression, hierarchical structure, and conspirate works. This group work in conspiracy, and we should cancel from Hungarian determination, because now determination don't cover a lot of organized criminal group, which organized criminal group works in a loosely network or corporate crime. Yes, I suggest in my PhD and in a lot of article the Hungarian criminal code, that this determination in Hungarian criminal code we should amend. I think the new determination cover more organized criminals group, and we can use organized criminals. We can qualify a lot of criminal group activity as organized criminals group.
Okay, thank you. And another question, last question in the Q&A is again to Csaba. Do you consider parts of the songbird trade as joint corporate organized crime groups? And what are the implications then for enforcement? And can you a little bit elaborate on how do you see this link between corporate and organized crime groups?
Yes, I mentioned this activity referred to organized crime activity, and I think the authority should launch more joint investigation in Europe, mainly in Europe, because the changing of information is lack in these cases, and the authority should deal with these cases as serious crime. I mentioned the division of labor, and more people work together in this group. These facts refer to organized criminal group, and one of case which I mentioned, in which the Italian perpetrator was arrested by Italian police. Finally, the Italian police prove this crime group qualify organized criminals group.
And then out of my curiosity, I have a question about these songbirds, because you mentioned that sometimes this, or even often, these songbirds used for food. I mean, the value of songbirds is for singing, you know. So
Yes.
how come that that their function is suddenly their value is changing, and who is eating songbirds? I mean,
I don't know exactly. Few range people eat these songbirds' delicious food. It's very, very interesting for us. I don't know why, but the songbirds' price is very high in the black market. Yes.
I see
More
Joanna.
more €100. Yes, yes.
Joanna, you raised your hand, please.
Yeah, thank you. But I just wanted to connect to the songbirds issue, because for me it was also very interesting to see that really it's considered a delicacy. In some parts of northern Italy, it is like a traditional food, but because of the changing of the law, it's now forbidden to hunt these animals. On the other hand, there is a trading route, as Csaba also mentioned, from Eastern European countries, for example, from Romania and also from non-EU member states, through Hungary and through Croatia to Italy, and they really serve these birds as food still in some places. And also in a couple of years back, it's kind of an older data that I found. I think this case is happened 20 years ago, but they use tourist organizations in order to hide the activity of the criminal group who smuggle the birds from these countries and through Hungary and through Croatia to Italy. And the tendency is kind of astonishing, because they hunt like several thousands of these birds, so it's unsustainable. And I think it's quite interesting, but it's just one example, because traditions highly influences wildlife trade. I think we all aware of this, and I think it's for Hungary it was quite a huge issue, because we are kind of home of several species of songbirds, and it's still happening, unfortunately, in the last couple of years.
And this is very interesting, because, of course, if you go to some Asian countries, you see the function of not only songbirds, but birds in general for mercy release. The cages are open just to show how or this brings also from religious perspective, it's very important to do something good. These mercy release acts, and here we see in a kind of multifunctional position of something which I would never consider songbirds as for the menu in the restaurant, you know. So it's quite an interesting. We don't have questions anymore. Do you have remarks or questions to each other, maybe the panelists?
Actually, I have a question if we still have time to Anna, because for me it was a very interesting presentation, because through my presentation I also see the importance of the seizure. So I think it's a very great issue that you raised. And it's so good to hear that you also collected good practices and all, like the practical side, because usually as a lawyer, I usually see like, you know, a theoretical side of the question. So can you mention a couple of these good examples or good practices that hasn't been mentioned so far, connecting to the fight against wildlife crime and seizures?
Yes, there are many, but yes, for example, also I didn't have the time to mention what a big issue also kind of the identification of wildlife is. So saying kind of what taxon it is and more, and yes, you have the problems as well as in Germany and Czech Republic, also in Kenya and Uganda, and there actually they have developed quite recently these mobile forensic kits that they at least have the equipment to do identification, like preliminary identification on the ground right away, which helps enormously with prosecution, as you can imagine, and enforcement like going on. So these things, and in Europe, on the other hand, so in Germany and in Czech Republic right now, they're trying kind of to build up the forensic analysis capacities. So I think good practices there has been this kind of information sharing between the institutions, although there are still many walls, especially in Germany, between the different federal states, between the different institutions. So yes, this is going on, and in general, I think everywhere it was stressed interagency cooperation as being key to functioning enforcement. I mean, I think all of you have also come across this, and also the barriers which still remain because they still often do work in silos. So I think this would be the most important, or just the cooperation and yes, also international cooperation, then I would say, between the different countries, because information on seizures, especially many of the enforcement authorities did disclose that they are not necessarily sharing it with the countries, even though they can even identify that it's coming from this country or that country. So going on with management, and even the question of repatriation, therefore, does not even get raised. So
Thank you.
Thank you very much. No more comments. So I want to thank you all for participating in this very important panel on this global problem of wildlife and organized crime. Joanna, Anna, Csaba, thank you very much. Also thanks for the organizers of this panel. And of course, I wish you a good luck in your future research. Thank you. Bye-bye.
thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.